Hello everybody and welcome to the Verde Valley. We are just outside of the small town of Cottonwood and we are parked here about to get ready on another Jeep adventure today. The plan is to head out on a new trail that we haven't covered yet, and that is Mingus Mountain. This trail should make for a pretty fun adventure today as we climb over 4,000 feet up to the summit, which is only about 15 miles away. Along the way, there should be some pretty epic views, an old mine to check out, and maybe even a little bit of challenging trail to take the Jeep on. Once we get up to the top of Mingus, we'll check out the view of course, and then try and find a nice camp spot for the night on the other side of Highway 89A before heading back home tomorrow. It's always fun checking out a new trail that we haven't been on yet, so we are looking forward to an adventurous day. This is also the first time we will be taking our Jeep out with the new rear bumper on, so I'll be looking forward to see how everything goes with that. With that being said, it was time for me and my buddy to get underway. Even though it was still mid-morning, the temperature was already a tad on the warm side. Back in Phoenix, we were going through hopefully one of the last heat spells of the year, which is what prompted this trip up to northern Arizona in the first place. The trail remains fairly wide and smooth as it immediately begins to climb. The trail is pretty much uphill the whole way, so be sure to keep an eye on your temperature gauge as you move along, especially on warmer days. It didn't take long for the views to improve. The higher up we climbed, the more of the stunning Verde Valley we were able to see off to our left. The red rocks of Sedona quickly came into view. Further to the north, however, was a large smoke plume. The fairly warm and dry conditions meant that the rhino and platypus fires were still burning across the valley from us, and that was clearly visible from this point. We continued up the trail as things got rockier and more rutted out. We were able to remain in two-wheel drive, at least for now. Eventually, we worked our way towards what looked to be a complex mining area. Only about 5 miles from the start of the trail, we entered into the Copper Chief Mine. Old foundations and ore piles remained along the trail. We parked the Jeep in the shadow of Mingus Mountain, whose summit loomed far overhead. At this point, we still had almost 3,000 vertical feet separating us from the top of the mountain. We hopped out on foot and figured we would spend a little bit of time walking along the road. Numerous concrete foundations from the mine remain on the north-facing slope. This site here wasn't where the ore was actually dug out of the ground, but likely where it was processed before being transported down the mountain. The layout includes old metal ore bins, and the concrete pads outline where a stamp mill once sat. Metal shards, old rods in the concrete foundations, and interesting rocks lay strewn about the ground. The Copper Chief was a moderately successful mineral producer, operated from a period between 1901 and 1948. Like the boomtown of Jerome nearby, this mine was primarily a copper and gold producer. Other minerals such as silver, lead, and zinc were also found here in lesser quantities. Much of the success of the Copper Chief came around the same time as the success of Jerome. However, the production of this mine was much less significant, with the most successful years producing only 30,000 tons of ore per year. This can largely be attributed to the small sulfide deposits and faults in which most of the precious commodities were found. Nevertheless, the Copper Chief was home to a 350-foot shaft and over 2,000 feet of drift tunnels. Production slowed following World War II, and the mine was sold to Phelps Dodge, who also owned many of the mines in Jerome and throughout the surrounding Black Hills. Phelps Dodge later became Freeport-McMoran, who currently owns the property today. While mineral production likely won't ever happen here again, they do actively manage the mine runoff into storage tanks at the lower levels of the mine complex, which cannot be accessed today. While the Copper Chief was a cool stop along the trail, it was after 1 o'clock and it was time to get moving on the trail if we wanted to find a campsite before sunset. Past the mine, the trail made a few sharp turns and continued to get rougher and climb. Not long after, we came to the most challenging section yet. A few good rock ledges and boulders required us to slow our pace and get into four-wheel drive. With some careful tire placement and a little bit of spotting, we were able to crawl through the rough stuff. The trail eventually let up, getting smoother and easier, but still remained quite narrow. The views continued to improve as we climbed even further up. After a few more easy but bumpy miles, we had reached the south side of Mingus Mountain and began to head west towards the summit. From here on out, the road would get progressively easier as it passes some nice campsites and additional forest roads to explore. We made a hard right and quickly cruised through a small community perched near the top of Mingus Mountain. Despite only seeing a few other people all day on the trail today, the summit was jam-packed with activity. The top of Mingus Mountain has a lot going on. There are numerous campgrounds, parking lots, hiking trails, and communication towers. We opted for the northernmost overlook. This spot is also home to another unique recreational opportunity, hang gliding. Complete with a launch pad and a windsock, this site is ready for those looking to fly into the void of the Verde Valley far below. The commanding view from this 7,800-foot lookout is nothing short of breathtaking. We could see most of the trail we had completed earlier today, and the towns of Cottonwood and Sedona lay far off in the distance. We spent quite a few minutes checking out the view before heading back to the Jeep. The plan from here was to continue a few miles back downhill, crossing over Highway 89A, and then continuing west to our campsite for the night. The drive down was quick and smooth. We crossed over the highway and continued west on forest roads past the Wood Chute trailhead. The trail slowly got bumpier, rockier, and less populated. After a few miles, we took a short spur trail and dead-ended at an incredible overlook. With no one else around, we decided this would be the perfect campsite for the evening. We parked the Jeep and got out to check out the view. At over 7,000 feet, this spot overlooks Chino Valley and Prescott Valley to the west, and has views of Wood Chute Mountain Wilderness to the north. We quickly got to work setting up camp. We pitched our tent, got our kitchen set up, and sat down to relax as the sun set. The weather was just right, not too warm or too cold, and a light breeze blew through the trees. The sunset put on quite the show as the lights of the valley below slowly came to life. The view was nothing short of spectacular. After it was dark, we got to work on dinner. We kept it simple because after a fairly long day on the trail, the last thing we felt like doing was cooking a complicated dinner. After a good dinner and a few drinks, the chilly mountain air began to set in. We got a campfire going as the evening wore on. Pretty soon, we retreated to the tent for a much-deserved night of rest. After a long day yesterday, we were slow to get up the next morning. After we made it out of the tent, we were once again impressed by the impressive view this campsite offers. We made a quick bite to eat as we prepared for the drive home. Today would be a pretty low-key and uneventful day. We broke down camp and loaded up the Jeep. We then began to retrace the few miles of forest roads east back to Highway 89A. Overall, this was a pretty great overnight trip up in the cooler weather. Mingus Mountain Trail was a lot of fun and had a lot to offer. As far as difficulty goes, it wasn't too bad, except for a few narrow spots with some small boulders and ledges. After running the trail uphill, we figured it would actually be much easier going the opposite way we went. So starting at the top of Mingus Mountain and working your way down to Cottonwood would actually be a little bit easier. Either way, this was a great trip and a good chance for us to test out our new rear bumper, which still just looks so incredible. That's going to do it for this trip. I hope you enjoyed this adventure up in the Verde Valley, and hopefully it's something you can try out in the future if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back in the coming weeks with more Arizona adventures.